Welcome to the School District Number 20 background information video regarding student transportation. My name is Greg Luderbach, Superintendent of Schools, and I'm going to walk you through some of the background information that staff has developed around a variety of options related to student transportations. This information has been shared with school trustees for them to consider as part of the 2016-2017 budget development process. Today we're going to walk through two parts, quickly some background and context, and then we're going to spend the majority of our time looking at the detailed options that are being presented. How did we get here? Well, the topic of transportation and fees has been discussed at the budget table for a number of years. Last April in 2015, the board passed the following motion to look at transportation, both service levels and potential fees throughout this year. Some other important background is for the last 6 years we've had significant budget pressure. Over $6.2 million has needed to be reduced from the budget over the last 6 years, and you'll see here on your screen we've been talking about amounts like 1.2, 1.55 million, 900,000, 730,000, 800,000, and for the 2016-2017 budget year we're projecting that we're going to need to reduce services by about $950,000. So that is a significant amount. So how did we manage to cut those $6.2 million over the last 6 years? Well, you'll see here on the screen a variety of different actions that have had to be taken. So cutting staff, both administrators, custodians, less teachers, technology, teacher librarians at our elementary schools were reduced, helping teachers in math and technology and literacy were reduced, cutting psychology services, cutting administration. We've closed and reconfigured schools, as many of you know. We've cut more teachers, we've restructured and reduced our finance department, we've cut clerical, we've cut trade staff, teachers, more custodial cuts, we've reduced counseling at secondary levels, and we're still developing what the 2016-2017 budget is going to look like. But as you see from all of these slides, $6.2 million cut out of our budget has been a significant impact in all areas of our operations. So originally, when we started development of the 2016-2017 budget, we were projecting about a $1.3 million shortfall. But due to higher enrollment and reduced pension contribution, we anticipated that deficit to drop to be $650,000. Unfortunately, during spring break, we found out that employee salary increases that were negotiated by the province are not being fully funded by our government. So our latest projected shortfall is now approaching $950,000. What's happening in other school districts around the province? You may have heard or may not have heard that school district number 20 is certainly not the only school district that's talking about potential bus fees, reducing service levels across the district. What you see on your screen there are 11 other school districts that currently are charging some kind of fees. And this is beyond what we call courtesy riders, so people that live within the walk limit choosing to get on the bus. These are any students riding the bus. So you'll see it's both rural and urban. It's both on the island and out in the metro area as well, now creeping into the interior. What does our current system look like? Right now we have about 1,850 riders on 20 different routes, and it costs us about $1.3 million to transport those students. So an average cost to transport a student a year is $700. As well, we have about 277 students who choose to attend a school outside their defined catchment area who are riding a bus. As well, while we have walk limits, 2 kilometers for elementary students and 3 kilometers for secondary students, we still have 294 students who live within those walk limits who are riding a yellow school bus. What does the ministry and district policy tell us about transportation? Well, our local board policy set by our Board of Education says that transportation is the responsibility of the parent or guardian. However, the school district may provide transportation. There is no local requirement to provide transportation. Provincially, the Ministry of Education removed walk limits and references to student transportation quite a while ago. Before they did, the ministry's walk limits were 4 kilometers for kindergarten students all the way to grade 7 students and 4.8 kilometers from that. And so when we talk about walk limits, this is the amount, if you live within that distance of a school, you would be expected to walk to school. The Board of Education, School District Number 20, receives no separate funding for transportation from the Ministry of Education. There is no requirement on behalf of the Ministry of Education to provide student transportation. So with that background around the financial challenges the district is facing and some of the policy and realities around our province, staff were tasked to come back to the Board of Education, provide them some various options around student transportation. So the first one is the most drastic one. This is stop all School District 20 transportation services, putting the responsibility on families who may choose to use BC Transit where it's available or who will find other means to get their student to and from school. There's about 100 secondary students that we found that have no viable means of getting to school in this scenario because BC Transit doesn't service all those areas. Those families would have to find alternate ways to get their students to school. We also then had some conversation and studied the BC Transit service to get a sense of what would happen at all of our elementary and secondary schools. And certainly secondary schools are not too bad, but elementary school, I'm going to demonstrate shortly, have some significant challenges getting students to and from school. So, as I said, we had some conversation with BC Transit, our local service provider, and studied their current services. And here's an example. So this is a current BC Transit service to JL Crow Secondary School in Trail. So you'll notice on the row that says Fruitvale on the far left, in the AM, yes, there's transit service available. And the approximate travel time, if you work your way over to the right, is about 40 minutes on BC Transit. And then if you go to the right-hand side now, this is what our current school bus service looks like on our yellow buses. And you'll see we can obviously get students to school there as well. At Fruitvale, getting home from JL Crow back to Fruitvale after school in the PM, now if you look at that row, you'll see that's possible as well with transit. So again, Montrose, Waneta, Roslyn, all those options are serviced and the service that can fit within the current bell times at JL Crow. Here now we look out to Warfield, Janelle, and Tadnak. You'll look in the transit service column, third from the left, and you'll see yes, 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 yes. That means all those communities would be serviced by BC Transit if that was used. But when you start to get some of the more remote areas of students who attend JL Crow, so Rivervale, Oasis, Ross Spur, Casino, up to Columbia Gardens, Redstone, Patterson, none of those are serviced by BC Transit. And if you go kind of just past a little bit to the right of center, you'll see the number of registered students. You'll see there, when I talk about 100 students not currently serviced by BC Transit of secondary students, here are some of those students. We run into the same situation when we look at Stanley Humphreys in Castlegar. Our next slide is here as Stanley Humphreys. You notice at the top says SHSS, Stanley Humphreys Secondary School in Castlegar. These are on the far left, some areas in Castlegar. And you'll see on the transit service column, yes, need to add a stop, small time adjustment, not at school. So not nearly as clean as what you saw on the previous slide at JL Crow, just the way transit works differently in our communities. You'll notice in the Castlegar area, to get students from those three locations, certainly Southridge and Kinnaird have to use there's a transfer location at the community complex where students get off one bus, wait for the next bus, and get on a second bus to make their way down. And you'll notice the approximate travel time column is a little bit longer than our current travel time, third column from the far right. And the last one I'm going to show you as an example is Kinnaird Elementary School. So at Kinnaird Elementary School, you'll see here in the transit service column, Udashenya to Kinnaird, there is no transit service, either AM or PM. So there's currently 26 students, I see that on the very far right column, that are transported on a yellow school bus to Kinnaird from the Udashenya area. Those students would have no transit option. From South Castlegar in the morning, it looks to work fine, but after school, the bus comes by too early, and so there's no after-school bus service to return students to the South Castlegar area and such. So what you have is attached with the email with the original link to this video is you have an attachment of the slides that I'm showing today, but actually the slides, just because for brevity I can't go through every school during this video, but on the slides they have a school by school by school breakdown, and what you'll notice is the secondary schools in the metro areas, the kind of the urban areas, are not too bad, but certainly when you get to the rural and remote parts of our district and all of our elementary schools, the current BC Transit service is fairly limiting and would be a challenge both to parents and families to getting their students to and from school. But if you reduced all the transit service, I mean, it is the largest single savings. You're talking about a pretty massive savings. And as you see here on your screen, a number of other challenges. And again, you have all of these slides. You don't need to pause and look at that there unless that works for you. You can review those slides at your leisure. Pretty significant if you eliminate all transportation. It's 20 driving positions would go, a mechanic, an administrative assistant, manager of transportation. All of those services would go. But it's also the biggest money savings to the district. So you've got some fixed savings, because each route currently costs us about $50,000 to operate between the driver time and the fuel. So all 20 routes are gone. All the other transportation support positions and budgets and licensing and insurance, that all goes away. So if you did option 1, the budget impact could be a savings of $1.3 million. Option number 2. Option 2 looks at only busing elementary students at the current stops and walk limits, providing no busing for any secondary students, and that we would implement fees for all riders on SD20 buses. So in this case, this would be elementary students. So in this case, this option is maintains low walk limits for elementary school students to attend their school. We're still running buses at the current stops and walk limits, so there's no significant changes there. If there was a bus currently taking you out of catchment, that bus would still exist likely. But when you start to look at secondary students now, of the 750 current secondary students riding a bus, about 650 could take transit if that's what they chose. And 100, though, would have no viable means getting to and from school via transit, neither school bus nor BC Transit service. So as you go along, you'll see various other points that could be considered. One of the other things now in this option and all the options going forward, when you talk about implementing fees, you're going to have to now put in some infrastructure to collect fees, look at waiver system, look at hard guidelines for non-payment of bus fees, all things that would have to be put in place if the district started to charge bus fees. Other points and considerations to be looked at there, and in this case, you go from about the 1,800 students riding the bus in this scenario down to about just over 1,000. And in this option, if implemented and chosen, it would save overall about $250,000. Option 3. In this case, only bus students within their assigned school catchment area and outside of the former Ministry of Education walk limits, which were 4 kilometers for elementary and 4.8 kilometers for secondary. And then those students on the yellow buses would be charged fees. So in this case, we've got 277 elementary and secondary students that are out of catchment that would either need to change schools or would have to find their own way to get to and from school, because the buses would not be crossing and servicing multiple schools. Now, in this case, with this longer walk limit, so as I said earlier, School District 20 current bus walk limits are 2 kilometers for elementary and 3 kilometers for secondary, going to 4 and 4.8. Now you have 800 elementary and secondary students who are currently within walk limits. Now, with this expanded walk limit, would need to walk or find alternative ways to and from school. What does that mean? Well, here's some examples. At Twin Rivers, those areas, at Robson, these areas, and at Kinnaird, for example, those areas would no longer be bused. Those, if you lived in those areas, you'd be expected to walk to and from school, or you could get to and from school however you would like, but there would not be yellow bus service in those areas. As well, if you look at some other areas in Webster, in Glenmary, and out to Fruitvale, now those areas would not be covered. And just for the last 3 schools at RSS, that area would not be covered. At J.L. Crow, we'd no longer bus from Annabelle. And at Stanley Humphreys, everything within the Castlegar Complex or Vine Street in Robson would be within the walk limit. So pretty large change for our district, and certainly you would have to make a tough call and decide, is it reasonable to expect 4 or 5 or 6-year-olds to walk 3.9 kilometers to and from school. Certainly, if you're going to start enforcing catchment areas and walk limits, you're going to have to go through those and really define those catchment areas and enforce that walk limit. As well, this item here about no alternative addresses for drop-off. So now the buses would be a much tighter kind of a radius that they would cover. So we wouldn't be able to take kids like we currently do. In some cases, they take kids on certain days of the week to daycare or grandparents or other parent or dance studio or extracurricular activities or to work, or that service would be eliminated. In this case, if you do that, we'd eliminate about 5 less routes, less buses. You still have, because you're implementing fees, you're going to have to put all that infrastructure in place, and you're going to reduce about 5 driving positions and about a half a mechanic, and in this case you'd go from the current 1,800 students riding a bus to about 700. So what would the savings or revenue look like in this case? Overall, you'd have about a $350,000 savings from option 3. Option 4. So in this case, your school buses are only going to be busing elementary students within their assigned school catchment area and outside the current 2-kilometer walk limit. So walk limits stay the same, only within your catchment area. In this scenario, we do look at providing busing for secondary students not reasonably serviced by BC Transit, and then we would implement fees for all riders on buses. So in this option, you maintain the low walk limit for elementary students to attend their catchment area school. So those 245 elementary students, though, because we're only busing to their catchment area school, they would either need to find their alternate way to get to and from school, or they would have to possibly change school. And as well, in this case, we have 243 elementary students who are currently bused, even though they live within the 2-kilometer walk limit. So those people would either need to find alternative ways to get to and from school. 650 secondary students could choose to use BC Transit. The 100 secondary students who are not covered by BC Transit would now have an option to get to school via SD20 bus. Again, you're looking at the same kind of other impacts around no alternative access or addresses for after-school drop-off, for example. You're going to have 4 less buses required in this scenario, so we drop from 20 to about 16. You have all that fee infrastructure being put in place. Anytime you have the school district 20 fee and some students might be using BC Transit, the fees might be different, so that might be a challenge. Reduce some mechanic time, and in this case you would drop from 1,800 students currently riding the yellow bus down to 750, so a pretty significant drop. And in that case, given the reduction in routes and about $100,000 generated in fees, if we were to charge $200 per individual, the overall budget savings is about $300,000. So in all of these scenarios up to this point and the next 4 that we're going to look at quickly, these are based on about a $200 per individual per month. That works out to be just over $1 a day. And that number is not set in stone. Ultimately, the trustees, if they choose to institute some type of transportation fee, that number could be adjusted either up or down depending on the revenue needing to be generated. Option number 5. Only bus elementary students within their assigned school catchment area and outside the current walk limit. No SD20 provided busing for any secondary students, and fees for all riders on SD20 buses. So very similar to option 4, except in this case, there will be no transportation for the secondary students not currently serviced by BC Transit. So you've seen these points before. This one again leaves the walk limits low, but again you have these 245 elementary students currently attending out of catchment, which would have to find their way to school by an alternate means, and the 243 elementary students who live within the 2-kilometer walk limit would also have to get to school by themselves now. The rest of the considerations on option number 5 look very similar to ones that you've seen already. So in this case, you would you reduce 7 driving positions and about a half a mechanic. You'd go from 1,800 students down to about 620. Now in this case, because you have so few students, the board could look at an option without implementing fees in this case. Because in this scenario, by reducing 7 routes, you're going to save $350,000 in route reductions. You could generate about $85,000 in fees, and so for an overall budget impact of approximately $435,000 if you implemented option number 5. Option number 6. Again, bus students within their assigned school catchment area and outside of the current walk limit of 2 kilometers for elementary and 3 kilometers for secondary. No alternate addresses for outside the catchment areas, and implement fees for all riders. So in this case now you're talking about catchment areas and the current walk limits, but now you'd be on the yellow bus, both elementary and secondary. So in this case you have 277 students who would need to either change schools or find alternate ways because they've made a choice to go out of catchment area with their school. 294 students who would now need to get to school because they live within the walk limit. Again, most of the other points here you've already seen. Again, no alternate address drop-offs after schools. In this case, there's only 2 less bus routes, so you're not going to see a large fixed savings that way. Again, you have all the implementation of fees and the infrastructure that needs to go along with that. Again, if you've got less buses on the route, you're going to reduce the district's environmental impact. But I recognize that certainly you might have more cars on the road as parents need to drive, and that might be just shifting the environment from the impact from the district on to members of the public. And in this scenario here, you go from about 1,800 students currently riding the bus to about 1,325. So the savings on this option, 2 less routes, about $186,000 in fees, so an overall budget impact of about $286,000. Option 7. Option 7 is really about trying to leave the current system alone and implement fees. So you're maintaining the low walk limit. No student has to change schools as a result, because if the bus can make it to your out of catchment area school, then you can continue to ride on that. So that would maintain in this option number 7. Multiple drop-offs after school could be supported as long as the bus route is going there. So we're certainly not going to add or maintain a route to be able to drop students off at the dance studio or at the complex. But if the bus is going by there and we can stop, we'll continue to do that. In this case, you've got no elimination of routes, so no fixed savings. And you're going to put in all that fee infrastructure. But in this case, for example, in this scenario we would generate about $250,000 in fees at the $200 per individual level. That's after all of our costs to implement this, and so that would have a positive budget impact of about $250,000. And our last option is option number 8. Option number 8 says that we're only going to bus elementary schools at the current stops and walk limits. We're also going to provide School District 20 yellow busing for secondary students not reasonably serviced by BC Transit, and then we're going to implement fees on all riders on buses. So again, you start to hear various combinations and permutations of the previous 7 options is option number 8. So again, if you did this, very status quo at elementary. At secondary, 650 students may choose to use BC Transit to get to and from school. And or alternate means. The 100 students not reasonably serviced by BC Transit could jump on a yellow bus to get to and from school. In this scenario, you're only actually saving 1 route. Again, similar points that you've already seen earlier, or that you have in the slides in front of you. So in this scenario, you go from about 1,800 students to about 1,150 students if everybody chose to ride the bus, who currently does. Because it's quite status quo at the elementary level, you could consider this to be a transitionary step to another option down the road over time. And in this scenario, you would save about $210,000. So there are your 8 options that staff have presented to the board right now. As you read from the various options there, you'll see the third column from the left is the students riding, so that's how many students would possibly be riding it. Total buses, how many buses we would need. The bus savings is kind of the fixed savings, how much do we know we're going to save. The fees column is how much we would generate at fees if we charged $200 per student per year. And then the total column on the very far right is how much approximately could be saved through that option. So, thank you for your patience as I made my way through the 8 options that the board is currently looking at. As I said, the slides and along with a link to a survey are being emailed out along with this link, so you have that already. I encourage you to take a moment, review the slides. You can look at the current BC Transit review specifically for your school on those slides. You can look at again if the walk limits expanded, got longer, what the impact would be on the slides as well. You can look at all 8 options and the various points for consideration on each one. And then we would like your feedback. There's 2 ways that you can provide feedback, or it's not an either or, you can do both if you'd like. Attached with this email is a link to a survey where you can provide direct input to the Board of Education before they make a decision regarding this matter. And as well, we're having a public forum where these options will be reviewed, much like I did through this video. And the public can share their thoughts with trustees on Tuesday, April the 5th at 6:30 p.m. at Kootenay-Columbia Learning Centre, Trail Campus, which is 2001 3rd Avenue in Trail, BC. So again, thank you very much for this. We'd like to hear back from you via the survey and or the public forum, and hope to hear from you soon. Thanks, and take care.